When Emily first returned to the old family house, the sky was the color of worn linen, pale, heavy, and ready to break. She hadn't been there since her father's funeral 3 weeks ago, but even now, the scent of cedar and dust hit her the moment she stepped through the door. It was the same smell that had clung to him, quiet, contained, impossible to forget. The lawyer's call had been brief. Her father's estate had been settled, the documents ready for her signature, and a key left in an envelope with her name written in his familiar, slanted handwriting. Emily Carter. The only time her name had ever looked soft. She set her bag on the hallway table, running her fingers over the small nicks and scratches she and Daniel had made as children. She could still see the faint pencil marks on the wall, their heights, charted year after year, until they stopped measuring, until they stopped talking. Daniel had already called once that morning, his tone clipped, distant. "You're taking the house, right?" It's what he wanted. She hadn't answered. She didn't know what she wanted. The will was simple. The house to Emily, the savings to Daniel, and one line scribbled at the bottom that puzzled everyone. "The rest she'll find where she must." The lawyer had shrugged, saying it sounded sentimental, but Emily knew better. Her father never wrote anything without meaning. There was always something behind his words, a shadow, a hesitation, a secret he'd never say aloud. She wandered into the living room. The curtains were half drawn, muting the light that fell over the grand piano no one had touched since her mother's death. A thin layer of dust covered everything. The house felt suspended, as if it had been waiting for her. She sat on the edge of the old couch, opened her father's small wooden box of keepsakes, and found the same items he'd always guarded: his military badge, an old pocket watch, and a small photo of their mother, smiling in sunlight that no longer existed. Emily turned the photo over. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "Don't forget what we promised." Her chest tightened. She didn't know who we referred to. She was about to set the picture down when she noticed the drawer beneath the box wasn't sitting flush. She tugged it gently, and it stuck. A moment later, with a soft crack, the drawer slid open, revealing something wedged inside the lining: a notebook, worn and stained with time. Her father's handwriting stretched across the cover in bold strokes, "For the one who asks too much." Emily froze. The phrase hit her like a whisper from the past. He used to call her that when she was little, "My girl who asks too much." She had always wanted to know the reasons for everything. Why her mother cried at night, why Daniel left home so young, why her father locked himself in his study after dinner. Now, even in death, he seemed to be answering her. The first page began simply: "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I won't ask forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But the truth shouldn't die with me." Her breath caught. The ink was slightly smudged, the words careful, deliberate. She turned the page, her hands trembling. "I made choices I can't defend. What I did to protect you, though not in the way you think. The story begins long before you were born, long before I knew how much damage one man's silence could do." The rest of the entry was dated nearly 30 years earlier. He wrote about their mother, not as the saint everyone remembered, but as someone fragile, restless, desperate for affection. He spoke of his brother, Michael, and their strained relationship, how they built the family business together before it all went wrong. Then came the words that made Emily's pulse quicken. When she turned to him, "I told myself it was out of loneliness. I let it happen, believing it would fade. But it didn't. And from that moment on, nothing that followed was truly ours." Emily sat back, stunned, turned to him. Her mind raced. Was he implying that her mother and his brother, her uncle, had been involved? She read the next paragraph, searching for denial, for context, but found none. "You were born 9 months after that winter. I wanted to believe you were mine, and in every way that mattered, you were. But blood has its own memory, and I could never outrun what it knew." Her throat went dry. She stared at the words, unable to breathe. "You were born 9 months after that winter." The implications sank in slowly, painfully. Her father had doubted her. Her entire life, he had looked at her and wondered if she belonged to him. Every silence, every distance, every half-finished sentence now made cruel, perfect sense. She closed the notebook, pressing it to her chest. Her heart was pounding so loud it filled the quiet house. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window frames like an echo of her thoughts. She wanted to stop reading, to throw the thing away, but her father's voice seemed to linger in the air. The rest she'll find where she must. She stood and looked around the room, at the photographs, the furniture, the piano. Everything suddenly felt like evidence, not memory. The house wasn't hers anymore. It was his confession, his final trap. Still, she couldn't leave it alone. She needed to know how deep the truth went, even if it meant unraveling everything she'd believed about who she was. As the first drops of rain hit the glass, Emily reopened the notebook. The next entry began with a line that chilled her completely. If Daniel ever finds this before you do, it will destroy him. But if you find it first, you might finally understand why I gave him everything else. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of rain pounding against the roof. It had been falling all night, heavy and relentless, as if the sky itself couldn't bear the weight of what she'd discovered. She sat up slowly, her neck stiff from sleeping on the couch, the notebook still resting on her lap. Her eyes burned from reading until dawn. She hadn't been able to stop. Each page peeled back another layer of her father's restraint, and with it, her entire childhood began to feel like a carefully rehearsed lie. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the old percolator, its bitter taste grounding her in something solid. Outside, the world looked muted and gray. The same trees, the same long driveway, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. She had spent her whole life defending her father against Daniel's accusations, that he'd been controlling, secretive, unfair. But now, with the truth bleeding through those pages, she wasn't sure which of them had been right. She opened the notebook again, her fingers trembling slightly. The next entry was dated just after her mother's death, around the time Emily had been in college. Grief is not just mourning the dead, it's bargaining with their ghost. I've spent years pretending I could live with what I did. But when she died, I realized the truth doesn't vanish with time. It just waits, patient and cruel. He wrote about her mother's illness, how quickly it had taken her, how helpless he'd felt. But between the lines, there was something darker. She asked for Michael in the hospital. She didn't know what she was saying, or maybe she did. I stood there, holding her hand, while she called another man's name. And I forgave her. Or I tried to. I thought that would free me. It didn't. Emily's hand tightened around the page. She remembered that day vividly, her mother's fading voice, her father's hollow stare. She had thought it was shock, grief. But now, reading his words, she realized it had been something far more corrosive. Betrayal, buried so deep it had poisoned everything. The next entry was shorter, almost like an afterthought. Daniel doesn't know. He must never know. He carries my temper, my pride. If he ever found out what she did, or what I allowed to happen, he'd destroy us all. I gave him the business so he'd feel like he'd won. I gave Emily the house because it's where it began and where it should end. Emily closed her eyes. You didn't protect me, she whispered into the empty room. You just made me part of it. The words stung. Every decision he'd made, every gift, every piece of his so-called legacy, all of it had been loaded with guilt and control. He hadn't been leaving her anything out of love. He'd been trying to balance the scales of his own mistakes. Her phone buzzed on the table. Daniel again. She let it ring out, but the voicemail icon popped up seconds later. His voice filled the silence, tight, impatient. I don't know what you're doing there, but just sign the papers. We don't need to drag this out. The lawyer said you've got the keys. I'll take care of the rest. He paused, then added quietly. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. You know that, right? She replayed the message twice. Daniel sounded tired, and something about the way he said he didn't mean to hurt anyone made her stomach twist. Did he know? Or had their father told him something before he died? She glanced at the notebook again. A folded letter was tucked between 2 pages near the middle. It was addressed to her, written in that same careful hand. She hesitated before opening it, her pulse quickening. Emily, it began, I never wanted you to read this. But I knew you would. You always asked what others were afraid to ask. You should know that I loved you, even when I couldn't show it. The truth about your mother and Michael isn't what you think. There are things I discovered later, things that changed everything. He didn't betray me. I betrayed him. Her breath caught. She read the line again, not sure she'd understood it right. He didn't betray me. I betrayed him. The rest of the letter explained how her father had discovered her mother's growing closeness with Michael and, in his anger, had accused them both. He'd cut Michael out of the business, forced him to leave town, and lied to everyone, including her mother, to cover it up. But years later, after the damage was done, he'd learned the truth. There had been no affair, just a friendship born out of shared loneliness. I destroyed my brother for nothing, the letter continued. And when your mother found out, she never forgave me. Her illness wasn't the only thing that killed her. It was silence, the kind that seeps into every corner of a house and never leaves. Emily's throat tightened as she read. Her father's guilt was palpable, crawling off the page like something alive. And yet, even now, he was trying to rewrite the story, to soften the edges of what he'd done. She closed the letter slowly, her hands shaking. You didn't protect anyone, she said under her breath. You just kept choosing who to punish. The front door creaked open, and she startled, clutching the notebook. A moment later, Daniel stepped in, rain dripping from his coat. You didn't answer your phone, he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes flicked to the notebook in her hands. So you found it. Emily froze. Found what? He nodded toward the notebook. The confession. He told me about it before he died. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. He said if you ever read it, things would never be the same between us. Her chest tightened. You knew? I knew parts, he said quietly. I knew he hated himself for what he did to Michael, but he made me promise to keep quiet. Said it was the only way to protect you. Emily stared at him, stunned. Protect me from what? The truth? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. From the mess. From him. He didn't want you to hate him. She laughed bitterly. Too late for that. Daniel's expression softened, almost pitying. The past is done. We can't change it. Let the house go. Let it end here. But Emily shook her head, clutching the notebook tighter. No, I think it's just beginning. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, echoing like a warning. And for the first time, Emily realized the inheritance her father left her wasn't a home. It was a reckoning. The storm didn't stop for 2 days. The house felt like a living thing, groaning beneath the weight of wind and water, its old wooden bones creaking with every gust. Emily barely slept. Every sound, the drip from the ceiling, the rustle of branches against the windows, reminded her of voices long gone. Her father's, her mother's, now Daniel's, echoing in her mind like a warning she refused to heed. She stayed mostly in the study, where the light was dim and the smell of dust and paper made her feel anchored. The notebook lay open in front of her, its pages soft and frayed from use. It felt almost alive, breathing secrets into the silence. She had read it twice already, every line, every confession. But now, she wasn't reading for facts, she was reading for intention, trying to understand not just what her father did, but why. The entries that followed were shorter, written with uneven lines, as though his hand had trembled while writing. I thought giving them something tangible would make up for what I'd taken. But money and land can't erase the look in your daughter's eyes when she starts to see you as a stranger. The words cut deep. It was strange how a man could destroy so much and still sound so desperate for forgiveness. Emily pushed the notebook away and looked around the room. The desk, the bookshelves, the faint marks on the wall where family photos used to hang. Everything here was a testament to a man who needed control. He hadn't built this home to share it. He'd built it to be remembered. And now, even in death, he'd managed to tie them all to it like a curse. A knock broke the silence. Emily froze. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there again, this time looking exhausted, a travel bag slung over his shoulder. We need to talk, he said simply. She stepped aside reluctantly. You already said everything. Not really, he said, setting his bag down. You didn't let me explain what he told me before the end. Emily crossed her arms. Go ahead. Enlighten me. Daniel sighed. He called me a week before the heart attack. Said he had something to set right. He wanted to change the will. Split everything equally. He hesitated, but he didn't get the chance. Emily's chest tightened. So he tried to fix it. After ruining everyone's life? Daniel's expression hardened. You think I don't hate what he did? You think I wanted any of this? But he was our father, Em. He was broken. We both were. Her voice shook. You kept his secret. He met her eyes. Because I thought it would destroy you. She turned away, pacing. It did. He moved closer. Then what do you want? Revenge? To rewrite everything that happened before you were even born? Emily stopped, her back to him. I want to understand what kind of man he really was. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said softly. The kind who hated himself more than anyone else could. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before another storm. Emily finally turned to face him. He wrote that Mom's illness wasn't the only thing that killed her. That silence was. Don't you see? We're repeating it. You, me, everyone. Daniel looked down. Maybe that's what families do. No, she said sharply. Families are supposed to end it. He gave a weary smile. Then maybe you're the one who's supposed to. When he left that night, the rain had stopped. The quiet that followed felt almost unbearable. Emily wandered the house, opening drawers, tracing her fingers along the edges of framed photographs that had survived decades of pretense. Her parents' wedding photo sat on the mantel, her father young, handsome, with the same serious eyes she saw in her reflection. Her mother's smile was small but bright, unaware of what the years ahead would bring. Emily stared at the image until the edges blurred. The next morning, she drove into town. The lawyer's office was a plain, beige building near the square, impersonal, clinical. Inside, the smell of paper and coffee clung to the air. Mr. Thompson, her father's longtime attorney, looked startled to see her. Emily, I didn't expect you so soon. I'm not here about the will, she said, setting the notebook on his desk. I need to know if he told you anything. Something he didn't write down. Thompson adjusted his glasses. He mentioned regrets, but nothing specific. Did he ever talk about Michael? The man hesitated. Yes, once. He said he wished he'd handled things differently, that it was a misunderstanding. Emily leaned forward. Did he tell you what the misunderstanding was? Thompson shook his head. No, only that it haunted him. Emily's disappointment was almost physical. She stood to leave, but then he added, he also said something about a letter that wasn't to be opened until you decided what to do with the house. Her breath caught. A letter? Yes. It's in his safe deposit box. I'll arrange for access tomorrow. That night, Emily sat in the living room, staring at the flickering fireplace. Daniel hadn't called. For the first time, she was glad. She needed space, not from him, but from the version of herself that had spent her entire life defending her father. She thought about what the letter might contain. More guilt? More justifications? Or maybe, finally, the truth without the poetry. She wanted to hate him, but hate required certainty, and her father had taken that from her, too. Around midnight, she wandered into his study again. The light above the desk flickered as she opened one of the drawers. Inside was a small wooden box, the kind used for keepsakes. Inside it, folded neatly, was an old photograph, her father and Daniel standing in front of the lumber mill, smiling. Her father's arm was around his brother, the resemblance between them striking. But something in her father's eyes looked almost hollow. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, were the words, "Before everything went wrong." Emily sat down, holding the picture against her chest. For the first time in days, she felt something other than anger. It was grief, not just for her father, but for the man he could have been if he'd chosen differently. When she finally drifted to sleep, the fire had burned down to ash. The house was quiet again, as if waiting for the next page to be turned. The night after finding the letter, Emily couldn't sleep. The words kept replaying in her mind. Her father confessing to something terrible, something that had ruined their family before she was even born. I took what wasn't mine, he'd written. And because of that, none of us were ever free. The line was burned into her thoughts. She sat in the dark kitchen, the old clock ticking too loudly. The air smelled faintly of dust and the wet soil from the storm earlier that evening. The house felt smaller now, as though the truth itself had pushed against its walls. The next morning, she drove to the lawyer's office. Mr. Hargrove looked startled to see her, unannounced, uninvited. Emily, this is quite unexpected, he said. I believe I have questions you should have answered years ago, she said, dropping the journal and the letter on his desk. His expression tightened. You found that? You knew about this? She asked, her voice trembling with restrained anger. I handled your father's estate, yes, but I was not privy to all his personal matters. He wrote that he took something that wasn't his, something that destroyed this family, Emily said. What was it? The lawyer sighed, removing his glasses and cleaning them slowly. Your father and uncle had a dispute about the land. There was a document your uncle claimed gave him rights to the orchard, but your father, he burned it. The two never spoke again. Your uncle died soon after, and your father carried that guilt with him until the end. Emily stared at him. So all this, the uneven inheritance, The way he cut people off. Was him trying to what? Atone? Perhaps. Or control the narrative, Hargrove said. He didn't want you to suffer for his mistake, but in doing so, he bound you to it. Emily's stomach twisted. You mean he punished me for something I didn't even know existed? The lawyer didn't respond. She took the journal and left without another word. That night, the storm returned. Heavy rain, howling wind. Emily sat in her father's study, surrounded by his books, his notes, his silence. She opened the last pages of the journal. The handwriting was uneven, rushed. If she ever reads this, the entry began. Tell her the land is hers now. But she should know, nothing we own is ever clean. Every tree in that orchard grew from someone's pain. Emily closed the book, tears slipping down her cheeks. She remembered helping her father harvest apples as a child, her small hands sticky with juice. He had always told her that every apple carried a story. Now she wondered if he'd meant it literally. The next morning, she drove to the orchard. The rain had stopped, but the ground was soft and muddy. The trees stood in neat, endless rows, their branches heavy with fruit. She walked between them, the smell of earth and rock clinging to her clothes. Near the edge of the property, she saw something half buried, a wooden box, waterlogged, the lid cracked open. Inside were a few yellowed pages, sealed in a plastic sleeve. She unfolded one carefully. It was a deed, the original deed, with her uncle's name on it. Her father hadn't destroyed it. He had hidden it. Emily fell to her knees, clutching the paper. All these years, her father had carried the guilt of a crime he hadn't truly committed. But also, he had denied the truth from everyone, including her. He hadn't burned the document, but by hiding it, he'd made his brother die believing in betrayal. And then, he'd built his legacy on that silence. A thunderclap rolled across the sky. Emily looked around at the orchard, at the beauty and the burden of it, and felt an ache deep in her chest. She finally understood what her mother had meant when she'd called the inheritance tainted love. Her father had tried to protect his daughter by burying the truth, but in doing so, he passed her the curse of secrecy. That evening, she returned to the house, soaked and trembling. She placed the deed on the kitchen table beside the journal and whispered, "You could have told me, Dad. I would have forgiven you." But the house, as always, answered with silence. The next morning, she drove to the courthouse and submitted the deed, transferring the orchard's title back to her uncle's surviving family. It felt like cutting off a limb. Painful, final, but necessary. That night, when she returned home, the air felt lighter. She went to her father's study one last time, opened the journal, and wrote a single line beneath his final entry. "You hid the truth to save us. But only truth can set us free." She closed the book, locked it in the drawer, and blew out the candle. As darkness filled the room, she felt the weight of generations begin, at last, to lift. The morning after she gave away the orchard, Emily expected to feel peace, some fragile, fleeting sense of relief. Instead, the air in the house felt charged, almost hostile, as if the walls themselves resented her decision. She made coffee and sat at the table staring at the empty chair where her father used to sit, his newspaper folded just so, his silence a shield. For a moment, she imagined him there, the faintest outline of his presence, shaking his head in quiet disapproval. "You always had to finish what I started, didn't you?" His voice seemed to whisper from the memory of him, even when it meant destroying what was left. She gripped the edge of the table. "No, Dad," she said aloud. "I just refuse to live with your ghosts." The phone rang, shattering the fragile quiet. It was her cousin Lydia, her uncle's daughter, someone Emily hadn't spoken to in years. "Emily," Lydia said cautiously, "I got your message. About the deed. Is this some kind of joke?" "It's not a joke," Emily said. "The orchard was always yours. My father kept the deed hidden. I'm making it right." There was a long silence on the line. When Lydia finally spoke, her voice was tight, suspicious. "You think giving it back fixes everything? Do you have any idea what that land cost my family?" "I'm trying to undo what was done. You're trying to cleanse your guilt with paper," Lydia interrupted. "My father died hating yours. And now you think a signature will make peace?" The words hit Emily like a slap. "I'm not asking for peace," she said quietly. "Just truth." Lydia exhaled sharply. "Truth doesn't grow trees, Emily. And forgiveness doesn't pay bills." The call ended abruptly. Emily sat in the silence that followed, her hands shaking. Maybe Lydia was right. Maybe all she'd done was reopen wounds that time had barely sealed. That evening, she drove back to the orchard one last time. The sun was setting, bleeding through the clouds in deep red streaks that made the fields glow as if on fire. She walked to the oldest tree, the one her father used to prune every spring. She remembered standing beside him, his rough hands guiding hers as they cut the branches. "You have to take away what's dying," he'd said. "Otherwise, it poisons what's left." She touched the bark now, rough, cold, alive, and whispered, "You taught me how to cut things away, but you never said how much it hurts." From the distance, a car engine roared. Headlights swept through the orchard rows. It was Lydia. She got out, slamming the door behind her, her boots sinking in the soft soil. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I came to see it one last time," Emily replied. "Before it's no longer mine." Lydia crossed her arms. "You think this erases what he did?" "No, but maybe it stops the cycle." Lydia laughed bitterly. "You don't get to play the savior. You're his daughter. You carry the same blood." "Maybe," Emily said, meeting her gaze. "But I'm trying to be different." Lydia stared at her for a long time, eyes glistening with anger, or maybe grief. Then she looked at the tree between them. "My father planted this one," she murmured. "Before your dad took everything. He said the soil here was cursed." "Maybe it was," Emily said softly. "But curses end when someone refuses to keep them." Lydia didn't respond. She turned, started back toward her car, then stopped. "You really gave it all up?" "Everything," Emily said. "Then I hope it was worth it." Lydia got in her car and drove away, leaving Emily alone among the trees. The air was cold now, heavy with the scent of rain and old memories. She looked around at the orchard, her family's legacy, now someone else's, and felt something break free inside her. Not sadness, not regret, just release. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught on a small wooden post near the fence line, half covered by weeds. She knelt and brushed the dirt away. Carved into the wood were 3 initials, E.J.H., her father's, carved deep and uneven. Beneath it, faint but visible, another set of letters, L.H., her uncle's. The 2 names side by side, cut into the same post, hidden in plain sight. Emily stared at it, her breath catching. They had both come here once, long before the hatred and the silence. Maybe her father hadn't meant for things to end this way. Maybe he'd carved those initials as a plea, or a promise, to remember where it all began. She touched the carving gently and whispered, "It ends here." Then she stood, turned toward the horizon, and walked away. Behind her, the orchard stood quiet, the wind rustling through the branches like a sigh. As the last light faded, Emily felt the truth settle inside her. Heavy, painful, but clean. The letter arrived 3 weeks later, postmarked from a small town up north. Lydia's handwriting on the envelope. Emily sat at the kitchen table for a long time before opening it, the faint smell of applewood still clinging to her clothes from the day she left the orchard. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. 2 young men standing side by side in front of the first apple tree, their faces sunburned, their hands muddy, their smiles wide and unguarded. Her father and uncle. Lydia's note was short. "Found this in my dad's desk. I thought you should have it. Maybe they weren't as different as we were taught." L. Emily traced their faces with her thumb, the paper soft and yellowed from years of being hidden. She had never seen her father smile like that. There was something almost boyish in his expression, hope, maybe, or forgiveness. She leaned back, letting out a slow breath. The photo trembled in her hands, as if the past itself was fragile enough to dissolve. For the first time in months, she didn't feel anger or confusion, only exhaustion and a strange peace that came from realizing how much of life had been wasted trying to rewrite what had already been written. Outside, the snow had begun to fall, soft and silent. Emily watched the flakes gather on the window ledge, each one vanishing against the glass like a passing thought. The house felt different now. It wasn't heavy with echoes or guilt, just quiet and real. She stood and walked to the small wooden box on the counter. Her father's box, the one where she'd first found his will and the letter that changed everything. Inside were a few old keys, some coins, and a folded page she hadn't noticed before. Her fingers shook as she opened it. It wasn't a document or confession, just a torn-out piece of paper with her name written at the top and a few uneven lines beneath it. Emily, I know someday you'll see things I couldn't fix. You'll hear stories that make you hate me. But the truth is, I did what I thought I had to. If you ever find a way to forgive me, don't do it for me. Do it so you can live. She pressed the paper to her chest. The words weren't enough to erase what he'd done, but they were enough to remind her that he had been human, flawed, frightened, desperate to leave behind something that made sense. And maybe that was the cruelest truth of all. Everyone in her family had been trying to protect something, but none of them had known how. That night, she built a fire in the old stone fireplace. She sat before it with her father's letter, the photograph from Lydia, and the deed she had signed away. For a moment, she considered burning them all, ending the story in ashes. But instead, she placed them together in a small tin box and sealed it shut. Then she buried it under the old oak behind the house, where her mother used to hang wind chimes in the summer. The earth was cold and hard, but as she pressed it down, she felt something within her ease, like a knot slowly untying. When she stood again, she looked up at the bare branches above. The wind moved through them, low and steady, and for a second, it almost sounded like her father's voice saying her name. The next morning, Emily packed her bags. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. The house, the orchard, the memories, they had all served their purpose. She locked the door one last time and placed the key beneath the welcome mat, the way her father always did. As she pulled onto the main road, the early light stretched across the snow-covered fields, turning everything a pale gold. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller until it disappeared entirely. She drove with the window slightly open, letting in the cold air, feeling awake in a way she hadn't in years. The radio played softly, some old song her father used to hum when he worked in the shed, and for the first time, she didn't turn it off. She let it play, loud and imperfect, filling the silence. As the miles rolled by, Emily thought of all the versions of her father she had carried. The stern man with folded arms, the distant figure at the dinner table, the ghost in her memory who demanded understanding but never gave it. She realized she no longer needed to choose which version was real. They all were. That was the point. People weren't one thing or another. They were contradictions stitched together, held by love, guilt, and the stories others told about them. By the time she crossed the bridge that marked the county line, the sun had fully risen. The road ahead looked endless, unwritten. She smiled faintly, thinking of something her mother used to say. The truth doesn't set you free. It just shows you where the cage ends. Emily finally understood what that meant. The cage wasn't her father's mistakes or her family's secrets. It was her silence, her refusal to let go. And now, for the first time, she was stepping beyond it. As she disappeared down the winding road, the wind picked up behind her, sweeping through the empty orchard, stirring the fallen leaves and whispering through the branches like a memory set free.